So I wasn't surprised yesterday. I think something had gone rotten with this club, and in particular with Scheifele a long time ago. But it was incredible to hear how different the comments were from a guy that's supposed to be the leader and a guy that was, in a lot of ways, anointed the franchise player to so many other players from the Winnipeg Jets yesterday. So we will start off with Scheifele. First off, Remo, let's go to 11 first, because I think there was some question about, what was going on. Mark Scheifele did come back and skate a couple times at the end of the season. But as I mentioned on the day after the Ottawa game, the first thing that I said to the guys I was watching when Mark Scheifele went off is I wonder, or if that is the final time we see Mark Scheifele skating as a Winnipeg Jet. And Scheifele was asked about, how close he was to returning at the end of the season.
Yeah, I would have been back for playoffs for sure. I feel pretty good. I'm almost pretty close to 100%. I didn't really do any contact, so I can't really give you an answer. But I feel good. I was happy to get on the ice a couple times before the end of the year and skate with the guys. So that was a little bit of my motivation. And yeah.
In that sense, then, does it sting even more that the season's over now, because you're gearing up for a potential return, but nothing to return for, right?
Yeah. Yeah, obviously that, my focus was just to get healthy. I tried not to think about all the other stuff. My focus was just to, get the right treatment, go see my team and get healthy as quick as possible and make sure I'm doing the right things and make sure it's healing properly. And I did that.
All right, so there was Mark Scheifele, and I guess in the context of everything else that we're going to hear, it almost was, it was a note to everybody else that, hey, the injury wasn't a big deal. This is going to be a guy that will be healthy next year wherever he was playing. So he spoke about, how close he was to returning, and then was asked about the third straight season with the disappointing ending. Of course, in the bubble, it was the injury to Matthew Tkachuk. Last season, in the second round of the playoffs, is the infamous hit that changed the series against the Montreal Canadiens against Jake Evans. And this year, it was sitting out the final 8 games of the season as his team played out the stretch, not going to the playoffs. Here's Scheifele on ending the season the way he did again.
That's hockey, you got to deal with some of that stuff, and that adversity, those tough times, have to make you stronger. If you get negative about it, if you dwell on it too long, it's only going to weigh you down. So you have to reflect. You have to think about the good things, the bad things, the things you want to fix, and go into the summer and try to come back a better person, a better player next year. And that kind of has to be the focus.
All right, so there's a little bit more from Mark Scheifele now. This is where it gets interesting. And we've talked a lot about accountability. We've certainly heard that from a number of players so far this year. Maybe it was a little different considering Scheifele had missed the last 2-3 weeks of the season. But an incredibly different tone to the Mark Scheifele comments as opposed to most of his teammates with the Winnipeg Jets. Number 14, Reem, let's go with this one. Scheifele was asked if he could describe where things started to go wrong.
I think it's hard to really pinpoint one specific time. It was just kind of, little bad spurts that end up being, monumental things to overcome, and it's one of those years that you kind of look back on, and some of it's a blur, some of it's really clear, and it's definitely a year I'll try to forget a little bit. It was a tough one, and from a lot of things, COVID, injuries, a coach leaving, a new coach coming in, all that stuff. Losing, Olympics. I forgot about that already. So, it was a tough year. COVID, all that stuff. It's one of those years that it sucked, and it's a crappy ending. But like I said before, you can't dwell on it too long. You gotta reflect and think about the good and the bad and the ugly, and come back better next year.
All right, so there's Mark Scheifele and where things went wrong. Didn't really, said there was a lot of things, a lot of the things that all the other teams in the league dealt with, were sort of mentioned, but nothing really pinpointed. But the Olympics comment was interesting. And I mean, part of the reason why, listen, I was on a Scheifele over prop for the year, and, he did end up, scoring at over a point a game pace. Credit where credit is due, 70 points in 67 games. Did miss 15. But, and he mentioned he didn't like his first half of the season and thought that he was playing better later on in the year. I think the reason why many of us, myself included, thought that he was primed to have his best season ever was that competition to, be a member of Canada's Olympic team. And to be honest, that was why the first part of the season was so disappointing. I mean, anyone that was watching Mark Scheifele, and I know he had COVID early on. He said that he wasn't really himself till about Christmas. And again, this is sort of the first time we've heard that. So, maybe he was dealing with more than he let on or we knew of. The bottom line was he was playing himself off that team as opposed to strengthening his case to be a member of Canada's Olympic team. And Scheifele was asked, this is 15, Remus, if he felt pressure from the Olympics going into the Christmas break.
I wouldn't say so. I probably did. I probably didn't feel really like myself probably until, after Christmas, I would say. Maybe even a little after. COVID, some bumps and some bruises and stuff like that. And, I didn't like my game early on in the year. I felt like I started to find it in the last couple of months, kind of since the All-Star break. So, I was obviously happy with that and something that I can, figure out what wasn't going at the beginning and what was going towards the end. And, it's something that I can learn from, I can get better from. And that's kind of, how I'm looking at it.
All right. The other big topic that was talked, and we'll get to the bomb in a minute. We'll sort of finish with the main event. I mean, a lot of it was leading up to what we've all been talking about. Coaching change. I mean, Blake Wheeler had mentioned earlier at the end of the season he'd probably have a little bit more to say on that, and we'll get to Blake. But Mark Scheifele as well, a guy that had basically been glued to Mark. He was Paul Maurice's guy for a long time, and many of us thought that maybe to the detriment of the team. So it was logical that people would ask about Mark Scheifele as to how he reacted to the resignation of Paul Maurice just before Christmas.
Yeah, it was tough. It was tough for a lot of guys. A lot of guys. I think pretty much every guy, unless they came from a different team, only knew Paul. That was kind of all we knew. And, for that to happen, kind of before Christmas was tough on a lot of guys. And, something you can't really prepare for unless it actually happens. And then it happens and, you kind of don't know how to react. And I think, a lot of guys feel that way.
All right. And that was something that we heard from a number of players. I mean, it did seem right now. And I guess, those of us on the outside watching the way the team was playing, considering the tenure of Paul Maurice, the way the team started, and then some of the ugly losses, especially on home ice. I mean, it was pretty clear that, that was untenable going forward and something needed to change. Now, many people thought that Maurice might get fired. And I know that was touched on later on today, and we'll get to it with Kevin Cheveldayoff. But that did not happen. Many walked away. And, Dave Lowry moved over from the assistant coach's job, in the morning into the afternoon being on the bench. And obviously everyone's quite well aware that the results didn't follow. But at this point, things got really interesting. Those were questions about the season. And, again, like often, we didn't get a ton. The final two clips that we're playing were why Scheifele's still trending on Twitter right now, why we're going to be talking about this situation probably until there's some sort of clarity at some point during this offseason. But number 17, Reem, asking him if he wants to be in Winnipeg and what he sees for his future.
Obviously I love it here. It's been the only place I know. I obviously think there's a lot of big questions to be asked this offseason, about where the team's going and what's all going to happen, and that'll, happen tomorrow. And, I'd love to be in Winnipeg, but, I also have to see where this is all going and what direction this team's going in, and I guess we'll see this summer.
So that was a bit of a jaw dropper. I think everyone say, well, we're going to have to see how things going. It's important to note, the comparing the comments of Scheifele and Stastny yesterday. I mean, if you had brought someone in and said, that follows sports but didn't know this team, and played the comments of Paul Stastny beside the comments of Mark Scheifele and said, which of these two guys do you think is an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season? And which guy has 2 years left on his deal without any ability to renegotiate anything or without any real control? I guarantee you 95% of the people would say Paul Stastny sounded like the guy that was on this team long term, or that was coming back, as opposed to Mark Scheifele. And it all led to the final question. And folks, while you're playing this, why don't you give us in your chat your first reaction to what you heard from Mark Scheifele, no matter what side of this debate, if you want to call it that, what your thoughts were going forward, what you thought in. If you're with us on YouTube, hit us up with your comments as to your reaction when you heard this. Mark Scheifele on what he wants to hear in his exit meeting today with the Winnipeg Jets.
I think I just have to know. I just have to understand where this team's going. I'm in the prime of my career. I still have so much to improve on too, and I like where my game's at. I like the physical nature that my body's at, and I think I'm only improving. I'm only getting better. I'm only gonna be a better player next year than I was this year, and I just have to know where this team's going and what the direction is, and what the changes are going to be, if any, and I have to think about my career and my what's going to be best for me, and I think those are going to be I'm going to have to talk to my agents and everyone in my family and stuff like that, and figure out what I really want, and so it'll be a tough talk tomorrow.
It'll be a tough talk tomorrow. I'll tell you what I thought right away. I thought that it was maybe even more clear. And again, I tweeted this out yesterday. Anyone that's been paying attention to this team, listening to what the players have said, although we've heard almost very little from Mark Scheifele, especially for a guy that, is a leader of this team, the assistant captain, strapped to the hip with Blake Wheelers, the leaders of this club, the culture carriers, if you want. I mean, that sounded to me like a guy that had checked out a long time ago. And when you say, it's going to be some really tough situations, I mean, this is sort of like what I said before, Remus. I mean, that sounded like a guy that's saying, I'm asking for a trade without asking for a trade. It was just the first time it had been so obvious to us in front of a microphone. But to be honest with you, this level of engagement at times this year, I think spoke to exactly that. On the ice. I think that Mark Scheifele's off-ice demeanor and on-ice demeanor at times has been going in the wrong direction for a long time. Tons of people have asked me after that tweet yesterday, when did this happen? Some people say it's the coaching change. Some people say, it has to do with the Montreal media and the aftermath of the hit on Jake Evans. I think this has started a long, long time ago. And I've mentioned this and I've quoted this a number of times. Think back to the exit meetings 3 years ago at the end of the 2019 season after the loss to St. Louis. I mean, I think it was pretty clear something had gone rotten with this club at that time. And, whether there's all sorts of speculation that this was a big part of why Patrik Laine is no longer a member of the Winnipeg Jets. There was too many guys that were, star players, if you will, coming in, and there wasn't enough oxygen in the room, and the Winnipeg Jets ended up, making their decision. And, unfortunately, if it does come down to this, and Mark Scheifele, I just say this personally, if these signs were there that this was going to happen, you wonder if you could pump the true serum into some of the key players, particularly Kevin Cheveldayoff. You wonder if they don't wish that they had maybe come to some hard realizations earlier, and how maybe things would have gone differently. Because I, for one, think that all of this is tied together. Patrik Laine leaving, bringing in Pierre-Luc Dubois, and now to the point that, Mark Scheifele is saying everything that you would expect from a player that doesn't want to be here, and, is looking for a change of scenery. And to be honest, I mean, as much as we've kind of focused on this from a team perspective, and, I've been speculating that for a while, he was no longer untouchable. When you look at the contracts of this team, the deal that probably makes the most sense to a significant change to the core, to rising up some of the other players that are ready to become the real leaders of this team. I think all of that makes sense now, but to be honest, maybe if this had come earlier, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're at right now, because this team is still very talented. This team still has big league players, guys that can score goals, and one of the best goaltenders in the National Hockey League. I mean, we'll talk about the defensive systems and the way the defense played, and a lot of that goes to Charlie Huddy and Dave Lowry and back to Paul Maurice. But talent-wise, the talent is there, and that's what's made this that much more frustrating, I think, to everyone watching as it's happened. But I don't think this is that surprising to anybody. Maybe it was surprising in the way it was so forward that Mark Scheifele actually said something, but it's clear that all is not rosy, especially with the guy that Paul Maurice famously said at some point they'd be building a statue at one point. Remo, fill me in on your reaction to what you thought when you heard those statements, especially that last one, which was the money shot, if you will, amongst everything we heard from Scheif yesterday.
I was pretty surprised. A guy who's he's an assistant captain. He's got 2 years left on his contract. You would think the easy answer would be, I'm signed here for 2 years. I know it was a tough year. We're going to try to figure it out. To hear someone, with that position on the team say, I need to talk to my family and my agent. I mean, what is he talking to them about? I understand wanting to know the direction of the team and being concerned. That could be meaning who the coach is going to be. But, you hear Paul Stastny, as you said, and we'll get to that, talk about accountability. And everyone in chat is pointing out Scheifele saying a lot of me comments. I think you should be concerned. And then I started thinking about, Scheifele's really had, we mentioned it, tough ends of season. We had in the bubble, the injury. Last year was the hit on Jake Evans, and he had that press conference. And then this year, this one. And then even after 2019, a lot of people were talking about just his demeanor during the press conference with Blake Wheeler. But
he sulked for 10 minutes and let Wheeler answer every question. Yeah. I mean, it was the worst body language I can remember maybe at any point of any player in the 11 years for a guy that's supposed to be maybe the key guy to moving things forward. To see him there, I mean, it was obvious that something went wrong. And listen, I know there's a lot of criticism, and I have a bunch of it too, for them not understanding and realizing this earlier and doing something about it earlier. And that certainly falls on the general manager and the organization. But I also think that they truly did believe that Mark Scheifele was a guy that they could get back to the level that he played in 2017-18, when, he scored 14 goals in 17 playoff games and was one of the biggest reasons why the Jets had their greatest success so far in the National Hockey League. You add in the nature of this organization to try to stay the course. They believed in Mark Scheifele from the day one that they traded him. And it's easy for me to sit here and say, read the room. And for those of us that watch the team every day going, something's not right, they've got more information than any of us do as to what's happening. And I'm sure they worked very hard to try to alleviate that. But I don't know, Remus, it's hard. It was hard, I think, for anyone, even the staunchest, even the guys that have been giving me a hard time for even talking about, maybe they have to make a significant move in trading Mark Scheifele. Pretty hard to look at that yesterday and think that this is a guy that's committed to this team. For all the other guys that have been talking about the team, and we've heard it a million times, that was the most self-set. That was all about him, his personal situation. And I get it; it's team sports, it's professional sports, and you want to be in a good situation for yourself going forward. He's got a contract. He is part of this team right now. And the accountability that we heard everywhere else amongst this dressing room in interview after interview over the last little while was completely absent yesterday. And there was nothing about the team, as it were. It's about what the team is going to be doing for him. And I don't know. From my opinion, I think anyone that was even on the fence got a pretty good dose of reality yesterday in what, in all likelihood, could very well be Mark Scheifele's final comments as a member of the Winnipeg Jets.
Yeah, when you start with it, I like it here in Winnipeg, but, and, you hear the me comments about him being in his prime, what's best for him. I thought it was a bit of a contrast from what he said last year at the end of the season. And I threw this clip up on Twitter. I don't know if you saw it, but it got a lot of reaction. I can play it here.
I did. Yeah, play it right now because we just heard what Scheifele had to say at the end of this season. I mean, you nailed it. I mean, it was about a complete 180 for the way and what he had to say after the end of last season, which, of course, maybe the most significant moment to the end of the Winnipeg Jets season was a terrible decision by Mark Scheifele. They got him suspended for 4 games, ended up costing him the rest of the playoffs. And when the Jets got swept, having to miss the opening game of this season, kind of dragging on into this year.
What happened in Toronto, that's learning lessons. That's coaching. That's, a player, I'm a guy that loves to learn. I'm a guy that loves to improve my game. And I want the coach to push me. I want my peers to push me. That's what makes good teams. That's what makes, that's what bonds, relationships is your peers, the forms of authority pushing you for more and pushing you for better. And that's hockey. That's the business we're in. You want to be pushed to be better. You want to be pushed to be a better person, a better player, a more hardworking player, everything in this world, you want to be pushed to want more. And, that only motivates you. That only motivates me as a person. And, that's the way I look at every setback, at every good thing, at every bad thing. You never can get too high. You never can get too low. You just have to keep pushing for more. And, I thought this team pushed for more. We were written off from day one of this season. We have that's about it. We were written off from day one, and we proved people wrong all season long. And, we go through that slide, towards the end of the year, and we were written off again. Everyone wanted a Calgary Flames Edmonton Oilers series. And, we proved people wrong. We made the playoffs. We won our first round. And, I think that's where my head's at, is that, we prove people wrong, and we want to continue to prove people wrong. We don't get a lot of respect in the grand scheme of things. Everyone wants the, Toronto Maple Leafs and the Edmonton Oilers, and the Montreal Canadiens to be going on. No one wants the Winnipeg Jets to do anything, but, that's what Winnipeg is made of. Our community is made of hardworking people that grind for every inch. And, we're that team that wants to grind for every inch and prove people wrong on a day-to-day basis. And, that's who the Winnipeg Jets are.
That was the same guy. That was the same guy that we just heard talking about there. It was about, this team, this city, a lot of things that I think a lot of people really appreciated. And, listen, it couldn't have been much more different yesterday. And that is a major issue for this team going forward. But I think if anything, it's a good thing for the Winnipeg Jets because, I mean, as I said before, I think that it was pretty clear that something wasn't right. Things needed to be changed. And I'm not sure whether Mark Scheifele was on board with what had been happening. And we'll hear some incredible comments from Paul Stastny coming up in a second in relation to that. But it happens in pro sports. Nothing's forever right now. And I know that this organization, and Paul Maurice mentioned, the thought was that Mark Scheifele was going to be a Jet for life, play out this contract, stay here, do great things, win cups, get a statue put up, and be sort of, the next guy. The guy like his mentor, Dale Hawerchuk, was when he was here. Dale Hawerchuk got traded too. So it just really, really does seem like we are on that point. Now, we're going to go for Mark Scheifele. A lot of this will be connected to Mark Scheifele because a number of other players talked, and it was hard not to know that 55, I think, was being alluded to or part of some of the issues that this Winnipeg Jets team had. Paul Stastny was fascinating, and there was one particular comment that stands out. But quickly, Remo, let's get number 6 and number 10 in first before we get to Paul Stastny really speaking to the topic that I think everyone was talking about. Paul Stastny referred to him plenty as the conscience of this team. I think with where this team is at right now, it is imperative that Paul Stastny, make Stastny the coach, considering what we heard the last little while. He is a free agent, though, and he was asked about his pending free agency, despite all the things he talked about, sounding like he still was absolutely a member of the Winnipeg Jets.
Yeah, I mean, right now for me, it's just I think I got to take a vacay with the wife. It's been 2.5 years since we've gotten away from the kids, but no, I've always said I kind of everything's always on the table. I've learned to keep an open mind. I think you just never know whether you don't know who the coaches are going to be, who management is going to be, who's making trades. So you kind of want to stay aware for that, and you obviously want to go somewhere. As you get older, you don't have as when I was 28, I was free agent. It was different. Now, the older, you don't have as many teams interested, but you just hope there's teams interested, and then you go from there. But I've said it before, and because I've been through it, it's easier for me to kind of just wait it out as long as I can and just kind of see. I think take a couple of weeks off now to kind of let everything settle. If the body feels good, if I can keep playing, then that's what I want to do. And then want the family to be happy. I think want the fit to be happy, but kind of all kind of options are on the table, and I don't close the door anywhere I've been.
All right, so there's Paul Stastny, and he mentioned at his age too. I mean, you want to know that people want you and find a situation. I think it's quite obvious that there is a path for Paul Stastny to return here, but much like we've heard a number of other players, there are some things that need to change, and you can make your own. I mean, certainly, I think the coaching staff and having a new voice is important, and they didn't really get that. I think it's pretty clear. Moving on from Paul Maurice to Dave Lowry, with an internal hire that happened the same day, albeit with that 2.5 week sort of buffer as the league shut down. But I think it's also about personnel, and we'll hear, the most damning comments about where this team is at and what needs to change in just a minute. Paul Stastny, he did speak about free agency. He was very complimentary on Nikolai Ehlers and his becoming a leader. But let's get to number 9, Remo, because this was the question that I think opened up people's eyes. It's just how starkly different it was from what we heard from Mark Scheifele. And these were the comments I'd say. Listen to what Mark Scheifele said, a guy with 2 years left on his deal, and Paul Stastny, a guy that had just talked about pending unrestricted free agency. Murat Atesh asked Wheeler about some of the systems that the team was utilizing this year. And Paul Stastny basically barged into the conversation, although it was a very welcome interruption, and talked about the lack of accountability, both to each other as well as the team that plagued this team this season. And you can judge for yourself on who Paul Stastny was talking about.
I feel like I'm jumping on the end of what you said there, the idea of them finding a system and playing to it. Take the opposite of that. Is that a clear sign that Winnipeg didn't do that this year?
I think it's just a clear sign that our players didn't play to our system. Like I said, responsibility lies on the players to whatever is put in front of us to execute it, and we didn't do it.
But that's also, as players, let me jump in here, is we got to be held accountable, whether it's player on player, and we got to have more respect for each other. And when you don't have that, when you don't care about the teammate next to you potentially, and you just care about what you're doing or certain individual things, that kind of starts bleeding the game. If guys are held more accountable, if there's more respect for each other, I'll give you an example. Who was it? It was Vancouver. I think they lost the game in overtime for like 10 games ago, and Boudreau called out one of their players. And it sucks. It sucks when something like that happens. But that player, I think the next game they played, that same team had 3 points, was +3. The next game he was better defensively. All it takes is one time to get embarrassed, and everyone hates it. And it's happened to us, whether it's in juniors or college or professional, and you learn from that mistake. But that's what needs to happen. But you also have to have self-awareness. You also have to realize that sometimes you do have to sacrifice a little for the greater of the team. And I just hope that guys realize every year. I think if you look on paper, every year probably. At the start of the season, you look at every lineup and you think, wow, that's a good team, no matter what. It doesn't even matter. All 30 teams, 31, however many teams there are, 32 teams, 31. So that doesn't matter. I think all the skills there, but it's the teams that are bought in. I look at Calgary, for example, this year, and their coach there. I don't know what people say about him, but he might be hard nosed, or he might be holds guys accountable because you look at some of those players there, they play a whole different game than they did last year, and they're a dangerous team, and they play a complete team game. And when a good team game follows, then all the individual success kind of goes along with it. So for here, it's kind of a wake-up call to realize that it's not going to be easy every year. Yeah, you've had some young guys that maybe didn't make playoffs the first year, but every year they've gotten better and better here for, I mean, you probably tell me the last 8 years. So it's easy, but then all of a sudden when things go tough, we'll see how guys react and respond. And I think it's always kind of a good learning experience for everyone, and hopefully they kind of take that pill, learn from it in the summer, and make adjustments and realize you don't want to be in this position, because it stinks, especially tomorrow when you're watching playoffs and you see how electric the atmosphere is and the fans are, and then you just wish that you were there, but you're not.
Well, that to me might be the most incredible quote that we've seen in a long time around here in Winnipeg, maybe at any point. When you hear a player that is respected like Paul Stastny in that dressing room saying that some players didn't have respect for their teammates, I mean, it just goes to show you how broken that locker room is. And, it's easy for us to sit around and people in the media or people in social media and say, oh, this looks like this happening. That was pure confirmation that many of the things that we had been seeing were exactly as they were. And to be honest, I mean, it sounds even worse than, maybe what you get from the odd, media availability, or certainly what we see on the ice. But Remus, to me, that was the jaw dropper. And the way that was a question for Blake Wheeler. I mean, Paul Stastny, it seemed like he felt that he needed to say that right now. And, the comments about, maybe guys being aired out. And I know Dave Lowry said he's never going to do things through the media. But I mean, to me, my reaction to that was they had tried everything with certain players. And I mean, you can all figure out who you think he was talking about without any, and that's the last resort, I think. When players, get aired out by their coach, in the media, he said exactly that. Sometimes you need to get embarrassed. And that never happened. They didn't get the buy-in. They didn't get the turnaround. And that led us to yesterday when we heard comments from Mark Scheifele and Paul Stastny about as polar opposite as you could possibly have. But to me, that was incredible. I think most people can have their own speculation as to who they're talking about. And considering he said that, and then Mark Scheifele came out with his comments that we heard earlier about 15 minutes later, I think told you all you need to know about the state of the Jets dressing room, the state of the Jets leadership core, and where Mark Scheifele fits in amongst this team that he was thought to be the key franchise linchpin for so many years.
Full credit to Paul Stastny, who's been so candid with his comments, not just this year, but going back for the last couple of years. And shout out to him. He did have a career season in points, mid-40s. I think that the most he had since he was with the Blues. And, I can't say I was too surprised to hear him. We've heard a lot of stuff, him saying last year that they weren't playing the right way. They were cheating the game. They had been cheating for a while. And that was when they went on that huge losing streak to end the season. And for him to butt in for a question that wasn't directed at him and talk about accountability being needed in the room, and that's something we've been talking about here for weeks now. I think it's refreshing to hear. You like hearing that, and I did put out a poll. Would you like to see Stastny back on the Jets? And I think he's become a fan favorite here in just a short time. 93% of almost 200 people who voted saying yes. Now, I think the big question is, will he come back? And if he does, how much is it going to cost and how many years? Because he's a player, on the other side of 30. But he did just have a great season. He did have some nice chemistry there with Wheeler and Ehlers. But, a lot of people in chat, being like, I wonder who he's talking about here in these comments. So, so we've heard if to use wrestling term, Mark Scheifele went heel, Paul Stastny playing the babyface role here.
Yeah, Stastny had quite a season when it comes to wrestling style heel and babyface turns right now. But make no mistake about it, he was the guy. I mean, he spoke, and as I said, I kind of half jokingly said, "Oh yeah, make sure Stastny the coach." That is exactly what you would have hoped to have heard at times from Paul Maurice. Now, listen, I don't think Dave Lowry was ever in a situation where you come in as an interim coach, your kid's on the team. I mean, it was I mean, it wasn't a great situation, and I'm not sure whether they expected more or whether they simply expected that Maurice leaving might, get things turned around. But the bottom line is what we just heard from Paul Stastny, and I think it's way more impactful, to be honest, coming from the dressing room, coming from one of the players on the team than even a head coach. But it's quite clear that there had been a real lack of accountability. Some players, maybe talked a good game, but didn't hold themselves to a standard, or just simply weren't on board with what has happened. And listen, Adam Oates, I'll say this, Adam Oates, who of course is the personal coach of Mark Scheifele. I mean, this is a guy that, they're focusing on individual things, skills training. We didn't hear anything about the team. And it's sad because for such a long time, that's exactly what we heard from Mark Scheifele. It seemed like he was, the core of this team that they were building around. And, there's obviously been some significant things that have really changed over a number of years, but I think have really come to a head at this point, as we heard yesterday.